Hello, and welcome to today's 36th webinar in the On the Move webinar series. It's Essential, Taking Care of Workers and Customers with Labor Management Software, brought to you by Honeywell Intelligrated. I'm Tracy Niehaus, Director of Marketing for Honeywell Intelligrated, and I'm your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. Please note that this presentation's audio is provided by phone number or through your computer sound system, so be sure to turn up your computer's volume. You may ask an online question at any time throughout today's presentation in the Q&A feature along the bottom of your screen. Simply type your question into the text area and hit send. Questions will be addressed at the conclusion of the presentation, with the exception of technical questions that can be asked and will be answered real time. Please note that we recommend that you be hardwired when attending this webinar. A Wi-Fi connection may result in lag time in slides updating or graphics loading. Today's webinar includes polling questions. Please feel free to answer these questions when they appear, and be sure to click submit so we can include your response, as we will be sharing the results real time during this live event. If you'd like to revisit key sections of today's webinar, it will be available on demand at intelligrated.com/on-the-move approximately 48 hours after this live event. And you'll also receive an email in a couple of days with a link to the recorded event. Now on to the presentation. It's Essential, Taking Care of Workers and Customers with Labor Management Software. Discussing today's topic will be Jason Franklin, Senior Software Product Marketing Manager with Honeywell Intelligrated. Jason has more than 20 years of experience as a retail supply chain consulting professional with a focus on process and technology improvements. Jason holds a degree in electrical engineering from Georgia Tech, and his input has been featured in multiple material handling and logistics publications. And with that introduction, the webinar will now begin.
Hey, thanks, Tracy. Thanks very much for that intro. Hello, everyone. Again, I am Jason Franklin, and we're going to be taking you through a couple ways that we can look at how COVID has impacted everything, how things have changed. But we're going to start here by first looking at a level setting conversation. What is labor management? So for those that maybe aren't versed in how labor management works, it's really a tool set and it's a program. It's really all about if you think about what your warehouse management system does, it's really all about optimizing your processes for receiving and storage. And similarly, if you look at like a warehouse execution system, you're looking at order fulfillment processes and how I can make them better. How can I use my MHE to its fullest extent? Well, labor management does the same thing for arguably your most valuable resources, which are the people that are working in the warehouses doing these direct labor activities. Think picking is where you're going to get the most most sort of impact, understanding how people are, how they're progressing in the picking, how's that going against your order pool, things like that. It also allows you to use your historical execution to do things like predictive planning. So now I can make sure that I'm right sizing my labor force for the upcoming work, when I'm planning for maybe the next day or the next week or something like that. And really, almost most importantly around labor management, it's about driving a culture of accountability. It's about helping individuals be engaged and understanding what their goals are. And it's also, in some aspects, it's about driving employee behavior to the actions that you want, so that we make sure that, hey, we're using our people in the best way. We're giving them work that's achievable and that we know that it's achievable. We're giving them goals and clear direction on what they should be completing. And then it's allowing us to use all that data for other things like planning, some of the newer machine learning estimates, things like we can do where we can predict attrition. And it also reduces some of the sort of bottom line KPIs that we really are looking for, so that things like time to fulfill and our direct labor spend, we're able to control those and in some ways guide them to a better place based on the information that we get, because labor management information generally feeds a continuous improvement program to help you make continuous changes to make sure that your warehouse is optimized across all the different solutions: your warehouse management system, your warehouse execution system, your labor, your transportation, etc. So I've talked about some of the ways that do that, but looking at the benefit drivers, some of the things that it does is it provides the visibility to that performance. And performance are done by defining goals, which are usually considered engineered standards. So I think, like I've time studied an area and I've come up with something that you get a minute of credit each time you pick this item. So if all the items were the same and you were to walk into an area and pick 60 items in an hour, you'd have 100% performance. So if you look at that sort of task level performance and you aggregate that through an entire person's day, that's how we're able to provide visibility to performance. It goes down to the activity level and it provides a lot of valuable information. Another piece of that puzzle that's very important is time utilization. Sometimes it's often referred to on standard versus off standard. So on-standard activities are direct labor activities that you would be doing, things like picking or packing or receiving. And off-standard are things like waiting for work. We do some sort of equipment changeover. Maybe it's a meeting. Maybe I've got some sort of setup processes that I do in the morning where I'm getting ready for my role. Those are off-standard. So being able to see how people are using their time throughout the day allows you to manage it better. So it really provides opportunity levels at that individual level that then we can aggregate into areas of pick, pack, and ship, which I can do information around that to manage it, and which I can then group up into other ones like inbound, all the way up to facility and enterprise, so I can make better decisions across all the DCs I manage if I do have a network of multiple DCs. Another thing that the tool does is it really accurately and fairly calculates based on that performance incentives. And that allows us to influence behaviors. So now I can define things like, if you get over 100% in this particular area, I'll pay you an extra 25 cents for every hour that you're working at that level. So then I can define different bonuses for different roles. And I also can do things using multiple variable standards. So not just using, performance, but using accuracy, maybe some sort of safety measure that I have, using those to make sure that we're influencing the behaviors that we want. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So another really major portion of what LMS value provides is the fact that it has all this execution information. I know exactly how long it took me to pick different types of assortments. I know my impact of seasonality or maybe a different weekly route-based changes that I have. And now I can use that historical execution to plan for the future. So that allows me to reduce the number of resources that I use, potentially lowering my direct labor costs. And in some aspects, I'm reducing congestion and some other things like that. So I'm actually increasing performance as well. Now, all this information is great, but if you can't communicate it to the individuals that you're helping, the direct labor resources, as well as your leadership, then it's not very much use. So the tool itself generally comes with very dynamic different ways, flexible reporting in order for you to get that information out. How are people performing? What's my units per hour? Has that been impacted by my changes in staffing? Things like that. I have all that information available, but I need a way to slice and dice it to get down to the answer that I have. Because one of the things that we talk about is the reason why you need flexible reporting is because hopefully you're building reporting around a challenged area. Hopefully you're able to figure out what the root cause of that challenged area is so that you can go in and solve that issue. And then we want you to be able to move on to the next issue that's bringing your warehouse down, and that might require some sort of different view of the data. So it's very important to make sure that you can slice and dice that data. It's flexible so that you can get to the answer that you're actually looking for, the root cause of your issue, so you can solve it. And then more recently in the last, I'd say, if we talk about a journey of labor management, 10 years ago, labor management was really about how did we do yesterday? Because the host systems, meaning the systems that drive activity, meaning like a WMS or a warehouse execution system or ERP, they were unable to provide us data in a real-time fashion. So they would generally just create a big file, we would absorb that file, and then we would process it and move on. Now, one of the things that we need to do to make sure that we were using all this element is start looking intraday, which we're doing now, because now the systems can give us more real-time information so we can look at how the plan's going to the day. but also for the future. What's going to happen? How in 4 weeks, how am I going to be in a capacity? From a capacity standpoint, do I need more people? Do I need to start the hiring process now because I'll need those people in 4 weeks? Do I need to start providing voluntary time off to make sure that I'm using my labor in the right way? All that information is provided through the labor management system. It allows you to make better decisions. So now we're going to jump into our first polling question. And the question is, are you currently utilizing labor management software? And you can say no. You can say no, we're not using a labor management system, but we do track labor KPIs through an Excel spreadsheet or Google Cloud services, things like that. And then, yes, we are absolutely using a labor management software. So guys, if you guys see that pop up, go ahead and vote and we'll see what everyone's saying. All right. So hopefully you guys are all being able to get your answers in there, and we'll be able to pop up and see how people are doing. We found that about, in our estimation, about 55–60% of people of large, and it depends on how you categorize warehouse, but larger warehouses, maybe over 200 people, are using some form of labor management or an electronic spreadsheet for tracking. So people that have both that aren't using one and that are also using an electronic spreadsheet have tremendous value that we feel like they could capture if they were to move up to a labor management software. Okay, so do we see that we're getting our Q&A stuff? So I'm gonna go ahead and move on while we're pulling together the answers to those questions. So looking back in the past, if we think about from 1999, which to me doesn't seem that long ago anymore, it still doesn't, to February 2020, there were some different constants in our lives. There was this old adage about, your keys, phone, and wallet. So these constants, allowed me to be comfortable, right? I knew exactly what I'd expect. I could grab those three things, and with those three things, I could hit the world. I could get on the subway, as you're seeing. I could go anywhere. It was, it wasn't much thought about how I was interacting with people or anything like that. I was very nimble and very quick, but things change. So if we look at March 2020 to today, instead of if we compare that to 2019, hey, I was looking at my phone, keys, wallet. Nowadays, I need my keys, my phone, my wallet, a mask, some hand sanitizers, maybe a samurai sword, a protest sign, some holy water. It's just very different. What used to be simple and fast is now much more cumbersome. I can't tell you how many times I've walked down, I live at the top of a big hill. I walk down the hill to my car, realize that I don't have my mask or I don't have my hand sanitizer. So I have to turn back around and come back up. Basically washing up to my elbows when I get home to make sure that I don't impact my kids and my wife. I'm wearing gloves in public places. So now things like even just walking into the store has become this new thing of where I'm trying to avoid people, keep that 6 distance between other shoppers. And all of this new normal is a pain, but it's necessary for not only my safety, but for the safety of the people who's around there. So this is just a reminder that business as usual is really a fragile notion. It doesn't take much to really throw those things off. So now we're going to take a little time to check out the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and how that from the top has impacting goes all the way down to the resources that we're looking at in labor, warehouse labor. I thought this was really very, very interesting when we talk about the impact of COVID. One of the things that I like about this slide was I wasn't initially thinking about how different this disruption is than generally our other disruptions. And I won't go through each one of these, but if we look at the different dimensions, meaning geography, the scope of the actual problem, demand versus supply, the term, the impact on people's behaviors, generally, typical disruptions are local, limited in scope. The disruptions often impact the supply, but demand still stays the same. Disaster planning generally has been done and prior experience is available to give us a plan on how to address it. There's not really much correlation with the global financial system because there's maybe some sort of a hurricane, as the example says, a hurricane disrupt the petrochemical industry. It's generally short term. You need FEMA in there or something like that, or like flood rescues and everything. And then the localized impact the impact is localized to people, their behaviors, to the area that's impacted, and there's limited duration. And if we take a look at those same dimensions with COVID-19, all of that is different. So it's widespread versus local. The scope itself affects both goods that we need as well as services like restaurants and haircuts and massages and things like that. Our other, our sort of the different things that we do, like sporting events, cruise ships, to get away from it all, are also impacted. It's difficult to understand how, we've got impacts like school closings and challenges of homeschooling, and this is impacting everyone. The scope is just huge, and it goes across pretty much everything. So there's a high correlation with the financial system. It's a long-term emergency service need, and it's a widespread human impact with really an unknown duration and unknown final impact. We're still sort of figuring out what COVID-19 does to people's bodies. So just shows you that there's a much different impact across many more dimensions than our normal disruption to the supply chain. So COVID impacts everyone except grocery. I thought this was really interesting, and during our research we were looking through, and everything was down. If you look at restaurants, apparel, footwear, all retail goods were down except for groceries, because we were able to move in such a, technology was such that we moved to a place where we're able to do online shopping. And that's a huge ability for us to avoid people, right? So contrary to everything else, grocery is actually doing well, but that is in stark contrast to all other businesses and industries. As you can see down there, looking at Fortune 500 from McKinsey, 94% of them are seeing supply chain disruptions, 75% have negative impact on their business, and 55% plan to downgrade their growth outlooks or about to do so. So how does that now impact labor? So moving down one more. So if we look at traditionally labor metrics that we use to justify the ROI around a labor management system, or KPIs that leadership uses to make sure that we're addressing the current sort of needs of labor. In the past, there were things like being able to attract and retain qualified workers. And a lot of people said that was a major issue. We had an aging workforce problem where there was people that we were having trouble attracting people, as well as people were aging out and retiring. High turnover rates, competition in labor. There's generally supercells of sort of labor areas where there'll be multiple DCs together, and there's a lot of competition for those individuals because of the ability to attract and retain, and it's also expensive to hire new people. Another issue they have is people generally overstaff. Our warehouse managers are really incented to get items out the door and into customers' hands, so often they will overstaff in order to make sure that they don't get caught by missing something. So even though labor accounts for about 50 to 60% of all distribution costs, we're overstaffing about 20% because of these other metrics that we're trying to hit to make sure that we don't miss them. Now, one thing that COVID has done, all those metrics are out the door. All the past metrics have been turned on their head. Everyone's not really thinking about, they're thinking about different things than the metrics that we had been doing about overstaffing or retaining workers or the turnover rate. All that's kind of gone away, and it's been new items that we'll talk about in just a little bit that we're trying to address. And you can see it everywhere. It's a measurable impact. It's really easily seen in the news. So how are operations, it's impacting operations. People are shortening their store hours. They're doing hiring sprees and maybe bonuses to make sure that they're getting the right number of workers. Those businesses that are basically e-commerce based that are still growing are doing this. And then HR has to be involved. It's a different labor sort of engagement now because of all the safety and health and well-being concerns. So now, there's concepts of how do we handle emergency leaves? What happens to paid sick leaves? And also it's putting a strain on labor relations. Now, one thing that's great about LMS is we can impact all those. So from the shorter store hours, we can help you plan better to make sure that you're using the right labor, and then also have the ability to understand where your excess is, who's trained and and can take over those different responsibilities, so that we can make sure that we're having cross-trained individuals manage the different areas of either the store, the warehouse, or whatever you're using your labor to do. Then also those hiring spree and bonuses, how do you know who to keep and who to get rid of without some sort of metric? And LMS provides that in order to make sure that even though in these lean times where I'm trying to hire a lot of people, I'm still keeping the right people to make sure that I'm keeping my culture of productivity and safety and health all together in the right way. I'm engaging in everything in the right way. And then finally, HR allows me to track activities and understanding about how that individual's been working. So now I have a history of when that person needs to take emergency leaves. Is this something that they've done frequently? Is it how long have they worked for us? What type of productivity do they give? All those different things allow us to make better decisions around our workforce. And finally, with labor relations, we're tracking all those different activities and everything. So now I've got records of my engagement with them, how I'm involved with them, with my labor force. So now I have a history of how I'm attempting to make their job and role the best it can be. But coming back around, when we talk about what that impact is, it's really important for us to refocus on some different metrics now and different types of abilities that we want to make sure. One of them is the human element. This is not an operations issue. It's really an HR issue as well. And there's some things that we have to overcome when we start talking about those labor groups. So employees right now are leery of management. They feel like they're, prioritizing profit over the safety of the individual. So we need to make sure that we're engaged with them to make sure that they understand that we are all in this together and that there's a shared responsibility for safety across everyone. They feel retaliation for speaking out, taking sick days and things like that. There's more stress. There's a lot more stress in the workplace if people are focused on not only their job, but their home finances, any kind of illnesses that they potentially could get. And also that stress is multiplied when you have at-risk relatives living in the same household that you could potentially bring that to. And then a lot of times these, the individuals that we're talking about, they really can't avoid work. They need the income. So they sort of like, I know that if I go to work, I'll get money. I don't know that I might get, sick or not, but I have to go with the known, which is I go to work and get money. So we have to address how do we use our power as operators and leadership in order to address some of these issues. And that's acknowledging, the first is acknowledging that there's a changing landscape of elements that we need to do. So more than just providing a fair wage for the effort that they're putting in, we're now having to do things like providing a safe working environment, making sure that there's adequate space for employees. And sometimes that means planning better and right sizing my volumes and workers that I'm going to use from a direct labor standpoint. Getting new hires up to speed. We've got illnesses, turnover, and everything that's in a different place. And now I'm having either to cross-train individuals. So how do I make sure that they know what the goals are, that what's important to us, what KPIs we're measured with, and how do they get measured? How do we understand that they're measured? Generally, labor management systems allow you to understand who's been trained and certified in different areas. So it allows us to understand who could be who could teach, who could, who needs to be certified, who is available to be moved in this area, things like that. And that goes really into staffing the warehouses. Now it's a little bit more complicated with potentially rolling outages of individuals because of illness. How do I make sure that I have coverage in all the different functions? And that's by getting visibility into those functions and who's cross-trained and who works well in each of them. Another challenge that we're having is this direct-to-consumer order growth. Across a lot of different industries, they're now doing, we're going direct-to-consumer to avoid that contact that we were talking about earlier. So how do I now manage those different groups because of these rising volumes? And then also the allocation across channels. If this area goes down, this warehouse goes down, how do I manage it? How is that going to impact my current volumes? You need labor management to understand all these different things, as well as driving people to keep order accuracy and reduce, and dealing with reduced hours. So what are some of the different mitigation strategies that we should be employing in order to keep up with these different changing landscapes? And these are some high-level strategies that we got from PwC that I thought were very pointed and helped me sort of understand. So when you talk about protecting your people, it's really all about protecting their physical and emotional well-being, right? We got to make sure, you know, keeping a safe workplace it's twofold. It's one, that safe workplace from a physical standpoint, but also you have to look at from a mental standpoint. When people need time off, when people are putting evidence in, you need information and engagement in order to understand where your people are at and what is driving them to feel unsafe or what process is. A labor management system allows you to see sort of dips in performances, where areas where maybe it's gone down, and I can then address those individuals that maybe still have high performance to understand what they're doing different. And then also I can get input to understand what are making people feel unsafe, so then I can address it. And that also moves into the second one, communicating effectively, really. Being able to provide informations and being seen as information that's concise, that's timely. It allows leadership to be responsive and empathetic and show how they are. So making sure that, hey, we're maybe upping bonuses in some areas to make sure. We're talking about how your efforts were able to get these particular necessary items in consumers' hands to make sure that things are flowing correctly. You know, your part in overall helping the country continue with this COVID response. And then another thing that we're having challenge with is maintaining that continuity of work. I've talked a lot about that by making sure that people are cross-trained. They have the ability to become cross-trained. They understand easily what their role is and what the activities are that we prioritize as a warehouse or a leadership or a retail store or whatever that is. So making sure that the work gets done by understanding the impact, things like, hey, we're not going as fast, so I'm going to rate this plan down so we can only process 80% of what we had been processing. Understanding that. These staggered shifts, how did that staggered shift impact it? Are there different performances based on the shifts? And there's ways that we can manage that better. So getting the information you need from a labor management allows you to help maintain that continuity of work through cross-training, through planning and things like that. Accessing workforce costs. What's the dollar benefit or impact of this? And that is really easily understood through the financial reports that a labor management system gives you. It gives you direct labor costs. It gives you total, on standard, off standard costs, total costs for your individual, your area, your facility, how much is your cost per unit. All these different information allows you to understand, am I routing things to the right area? Am I using my labor in the right way? Am I getting how much have I gone off from a units per hour or cost per unit because of these challenges? All that information is uncovered with the labor management system. And at some point, we're going to need to prepare for our recovery. So as this dies down and, hopefully sometime soon, we're able to get back to that business as usual I was talking about in the beginning. But how do we make sure that we're planning for that recovery, that we're not reducing our workforce in a way that when volumes do come back, we're unable to service them. So all these things are able to define information from a labor management standpoint that helps you manage and mitigate all these different areas. So now we'll take a break and we'll jump on to polling question number 2. So which type or types of safety measures have you implemented in your facility? So there's that wearing gloves, masks, etc. Frequent equipment sanitation. Are you guys doing some sort of a social distancing? Is it a combination of the above, or are you guys just sort of taking it as it comes and managing by exception? So I'll pause there and take a little minute while you guys are able to answer the question. Some of the things that we've seen, and I've mentioned across of that, is definitely the frequent equipment sanitation. We've also seen groups buy more devices so that there's less device sharing. We are seeing masks in distribution centers. We're seeing less gloves, not as many gloves, but definitely masks. And there have been social distancing in both the break rooms as well as trying to use tape in different areas on the floor to mark out different areas so that individuals can be still fulfilling their role, but then also keeping a social distance. So you're dropping this off and you're waiting for another person to come through and you're giving them their distance they need to stay away. So we're seeing, I would say, a combination of all of them in warehouses that we've been working through the pandemic. Okay. So let's check and see, do we get the polls back? It looks like it's a high, and I don't know if I can pull this in here and you guys can see it. It looks like a high vote for a combination of all the above. So some people are wearing gloves and masks. Most people are doing a combination of above, and we've got one person that is not really addressing it yet. It's interesting. So I'm going to talk about how this is now that, we've sort of talked at, high level, what's LMS. We've talked the widespread impact of COVID. We've talked a little bit more about like how leadership would do it. Now I want to talk about the individual impact by taking a trip to the grocery store. We're going back to that grocery store. So we talked earlier about how, I have all these safety precautions and how when I go to a grocery store now, I've got to have a mask on, I'm keeping my distance. So I wanted to talk about the impact of that by talking about me going to the grocery store and how that relates to warehouse workers. So if we look at that quick trip to the store, I talked about how it used to take 5 minutes is now taking more like 10 minutes, just because it's like I'm trying to be socially distanced, I'm wearing these different protective measures. But there's also some other things, like the volume of items that I'm getting has gone up because I'm trying to do less grocery trips. So my grocery trip is extended, right? So if we think about how in the past, hey, I used to get in, get whatever I needed, bam, happy Jason. But now my wife has doubled me up with items. I've got to do this socially distance. I'm sanitizing everything that I'm touching. I'm making sure that, I'm not really running into people. So if I see someone in an area, I kind of wait. So now that 5 minute trip, it takes 10 minutes and it makes sad Jason. But now let's think about this. This is just for one simple task, right? A task that I'm not repeating multiple times during a shift in a warehouse. So let's think about this same grabbing a grocery list, which is much like picking items from a RF directed or voice directed type of tool. So if we think about that, imagine the many, many sad Jasons working in your warehouse now who's following those new safety rules and trying their best to be efficient, right? They're avoiding their coworkers. They're doing all this equipment wiping down. Maybe their masks are fogging up from their, fogging their glasses up, maybe even wearing gloves, which is a little bit different. And because of that increased order volume, maybe the reduced number of labor resources that we have, as well as the volume of people ordering online, what used to be that 5 item number is now 10, 15 items. And now it's much longer because of that demand. So how can we as distribution operators understand the impact that COVID's having from a engineered standards standpoint, meaning productivity, from a planning standpoint, meaning how many resources do I need or how much volume can I reasonably process? All that information, how do we know that? And that's through an LMS is going to be able to help, okay? So we see an LMS helping with these in 3 different sort of ways, right? You've got from influencing behaviors, meaning multivariable tracking, making sure that I'm driving people to do the safety measures or accuracy measures that I need while also keeping up their performance, making sure that people are, cross-trained and being used in the right way, reinforcements of social distancing, things like that. We'll talk about each of these in just a minute. Tracking results, meaning, how do I make sure that those engineer standards are correct, the impact of my planning, how I've got a comprehensive record of people working, how I'm able to, provide information to a contact tracing type of tool so that I can make sure that if there is an outbreak, I can go back, all these different things. And then finally, engagement, we'll talk about that culture of safety and how we can avoid labor disruptions. So now we're going to come to our final polling question before we get into those. And have you adjusted your engineered standards or throughput rates to account for any implemented safety measures? So have you changed what your expectations is from a performance standpoint based on the new activities and safety measures that you have to do in your distribution system? So, hey, we never thought about it. Yes, but no, but we haven't done it, but we've thought about it. Yes, we're in the process of doing so, or yes, we have adjusted our standards or rates. So this is interesting that one that I'm interested to hear what the actual output was, because from most of what we've talked to, they've thought about it, but they haven't done it. And what they're just basically doing is using a post-pandemic type of performance, which is lower than their general performance. So if we look at their poll results for our group on the phone, it looks like it's prevalently no. They've never even thought about it, and no, but they've thought about it. So it looks like people have, they understand the idea and the concept, but maybe they haven't decided that the juice is worth the squeeze yet. So they're still looking at it. So let's continue on. So influencing behavior. So I mentioned a couple of different things about influencing behaviors, and LMS is really, really very good at this. And I've got a couple of really great examples. So the tool that Honeywell Intelligrated provides has what's called, but a lot of major LMS have this type of ability. And we call it our performance factor equation builder. And basically what it lets you do is build different items onto the performance rating, factors, if you will, that allow us to incent the behaviors that we want. So traditionally incentives work like, hey, if I get a certain amount of performance, if I get 100, and I mentioned this earlier, if I get 110% performance, I get an extra 50 cents for every hour that I work at that time. Now, I've done a lot of these programs, and there's a couple things that I've always found to be true. Number one, monetary incentives work. If you give the ability to someone to make more money by putting in more effort, they absolutely will give you more effort. The second thing that I found to always be true is wherever they can, they're going to try to game the system. So if you're doing a single variable standard, meaning I'm just tracking maybe the boxes across this scan point, so the more boxes they get, the higher their performance, they're going to start lacking on safety, accuracy, some of the other processes to make sure that they get that performance up high to get bonuses. So what we suggest is layering on a different factor onto that. So maybe my accuracy, like in this example, is part of my performance rating. If you're not accurate to this level, then you're not eligible for bonus. So now that shows the individuals that, hey, not only do we prioritize performance, which we will pay you for, we also prioritize accuracy. And if you don't address accuracy, you're going to get moved out of potentially the bonus area. Now, throughout the years, we've seen some really, really interesting ones with this. One of the most interesting ones is, if you guys are familiar with the Crown InfoLink system, so Crown lift trucks have a thing called InfoLink. And what it does is it looks at when you're logged into a lift truck, it looks whether you're moving versus lifting versus standing still. And it rates that down into a number. For some of our clients, we've imported that number as a variable and said, hey, if you don't have over a 5 on this lift truck rating, then you're not eligible for bonus. So that incents their behavior to make sure that while they're on a lift truck, they're doing productive direct labor, or they can work their way out of a bonus. So now I'm able to influence the behaviors that I'm looking for, and that might be sanitation, a number of things sanitized, distance traveled, or, how I'm performing against the ship, all those different things, whatever is important to your business, we could use that as a factor in the performance equation in order to incent behaviors that we need. And the great thing about this is it's self-correcting behavior. I don't need my leadership out on the floor reinforcing this all the time. Of course, you're going to do it in the beginning, but then it becomes self-reinforcing that allows the individuals really to make sure that they're policing themselves. The next thing we'll talk about is tracking resources. So one of the things, tracking results. So one of the things that labor management does really well is collect information at multiple levels of your facility. Individual, operational areas, department, which is a collection of operations, facility, enterprise. All that information allows us to feed things like continuous improvement programs. It allows HR to have a history of interactions through coaching sessions and things like that. So now if I need to understand this individual and whether they're right for this area, I can bring up a full history of how they perform, how they use their time when they're absent. It gives me the information and now to make better decisions. And then it also allows us to share that information that we were talking about. Part of this tool is showing how much stuff we processed, how great individuals are performing, how these activities allowed us to reach this type of goal. Interacting with individuals and engaging with them and showing them not only, we talk about the carrot and the stick, using the carrot and less of the stick allows us to build this culture of performance and now pivot it to a culture of safety and well-being and health and things like that. Another thing that's interesting is this gives me all the activity that individuals doing. So I have a comprehensive record of workers. So I'm able to provide like a contract tracking. I can use this for a data source towards that to make sure that I'm pulling individuals that may have been ill and making sure who's around them and tracking through that. I've got a comprehensive history that allows me to do things like that. And then finally, we'll talk about maybe the most important, which is employee engagement. So making sure that we're driving engagement. When we're really looking at this culture of safety, it's all about interacting with those individuals to make sure they understand that, number one, they're important to you. Number one, that role is achievable and that we want them to excel in that role. And then it also allows you to avoid those labor disruptions because we've got this culture of individuals buying in. Maybe they're giving feedback that allows you to help the process. Them being part of all that allows them to better be part of the team and give you advance notice if something challenging is happening. So it allows you to, again, engage with those individuals on a different level to start driving a cultural, because one of the things a cultural change, one of the things I talk about with labor management, it's not just a software tool. It is also a cultural tool that allows you to create the culture you're looking for. And in this case, in this current environment, it's one around safety and well-being. So how do we use the tool to drive individuals towards that? And that's part of driving this positive work culture and by maintaining that employee engagement amid this certainty. So it's really about taking the information from a labor management system, that assessment, interacting with them for some feedback that allows you to drive a development plan that maybe puts them into the right coaching plan. All this information allows us to make sure that we're connected with those individuals so we're not surprised by things. So I'm always long-winded, so I'm getting close to my time. So to sum it all up, how can LMS help with the different challenges that we're running into with COVID and the different labor impacts that it's having? 3 ways we feel: influencing behaviors, tracking results, as well as driving engagement. And you can see the different ways that we do that. So an LMS is something that if you guys aren't using one, I suggest you look into it. Obviously we have one, but there's multiple providers that have one, and there's lots of good options out there. But one thing we do see is it helps you influence the behaviors that you're looking for without a lot of management overhead. It allows you to, gives you visibility to multiple ways. How do I, am I planning correctly? Do I have the right amount of people? What are my backup people? How many people are needed to process this much volume? All those questions. What's my cost per units and units per hour? Has that been impacted by the safety measures I put in? All that information is available from a labor management system. And then finally, almost the most important, it's really driving this culture of engagement. How do I make sure that the resources feel heard? They feel like that we are listening to what they're doing and putting in policies in place to keep them safe from both a physical and a mental health standpoint, and also showing, where should we be putting. Another thing that I didn't mention is a labor management system allows you to show where you should be focusing your work. I mean, who is the individual that will gain the most out of this interaction? You'll know that with labor management. And then that engagement allows you to do things like avoid labor disruptions and things like that. So with all that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the questions. So I'm going to throw it back over to you, Tracy. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Jason. That was a great presentation. Lots of information there. And as Jason mentioned, we are now going to move on to our question and answer portion of the event. We do have a couple of questions that came in already, but as a reminder, you can also ask an online question during our Q&A portion here along that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So if you have additional questions, feel free to go ahead and submit those. And I'll just go ahead and jump right into the first question, Jason, is what kind of HR integrations are possible?
Oh, good question. So from an HR standpoint, generally the LMS it does a couple different interactions. One, it pushes out any kind of bonuses or bonus information to payroll. So that's generally the main interaction. So if I've set up some sort of incentive, be it monetary or non-monetary, having a way to provide that to HR for them to understand how much we should be paid and what level that should be is very important. The other thing that we see is really extractions from the data that Goalpost has, which is things like coaching sessions and our interactions and discussions around those. So the tool itself generally LMS will save all that information for you. So you're extracting that directly from LMS, but we've also seen in some ways where it pushes it into a PeopleSoft or something like that, so they can have additional information attached to that individual's record that come from the labor management side. And then they also have the information from the sort of HR people side. So generally 2 interactions, 1 to payroll, and sometimes to an HR system if they don't extract it directly from the labor management system itself.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, next question. Where does the LMS store its data, like in the cloud or local or someplace else?
Another good question. So it depends on how you deploy. So different providers have different sort of options. Like if I speak to our options, we have an on-premise solution, which we will, install the software somewhere in your data center. So it's behind your own firewall and protect it, and you can collate that. We also have hosted models where we provide the hosting and then you access through a web-enabled tool or something like that. So in the first case, it's all stored locally in your data center or whatever data center has been signed up. In the other case, it's behind a secure firewall that we define security with you so that you have a VPN to connect into that. And then we store the data in the quote unquote cloud through like an Azure cloud or something like that.
Okay, let's see, next question. How many employees do you need to make it worthwhile to have labor management?
That is an excellent question. And it's really right around 50 people. So when you have more than 50 direct labor, and that could be across multiple facilities. We've had maybe a 3PL that I've got like 6 satellite, locations around this, and each one has about 12, 15 people in it. Well, the aggregation of all those will provide you the benefit that you're looking for because of the tool's distributed nature. So really, anytime you have over 50 direct labor, you're going to get a ROI of about a year. And then anytime after that year is bonus money that you're getting back from labor savings, from throughput increases and things like that.
Okay. Let's see, next question. You mentioned productivity reports earlier. What are some other types of reports that you can run?
So from a labor management standpoint, it really depends sometimes on how many features you're using, but there's also some base reports that you always get. So from a base report, it's all about individual operation, department, facility, productivity, so performance, time utilization, and your standards. Now, some of the other things that you're doing is costing information. So I know how much I'm spending in direct labor in this area, in this collection of areas, in this whole facility. I also am able to provide the HR information that we talked about. This individual's been coached by this coach this many times. Here was their performance when they weren't being coached. Here's their performance while they're being coached. So I can pull out coaching type HR information. I also have planning information in there. So I can define a plan. I've got 8 hours and I've got 10 people. How much can I process today? And I have a report around that processing. And then again, sort of the cost per units per hour, those metrics on throughput are also sort of another one. So you're looking at sort of performance reporting, time utilization, dollars and expense. You're looking at HR type reports as well as planning type reports. Those are sort of the main ones. And then you can get different information by combining some of those.
Okay, that's interesting. Let's see here. How long does it take to set up an LMS?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's a good question as well. So from a installation standpoint, and I think I'm speaking for most of, there's a couple different things that you want to talk about when you're looking at a labor management tool. So number one, if we talk about the installation or creation of the facility, that's pretty quick. That's like a couple days once we have all the servers and stuff ready. The real thing is, do you have engineered standards, which are those goals I talked about earlier? It takes, you get a minute of credit each time you do this activity. If you do 60 of these activities in an hour, you get 100% performance. The standard itself is needed, and that takes generally about 3 months. Maybe it's like 2 to 3 weeks per area as you go, sort of, right? And then so the rollout generally for LMS generally falls along that engineered standard sort of development. So you're looking at maybe a couple days to install, and then a 3-month period for you to get the right integrations, to pull the information on, create standards for them, make sure the standards are coming through correctly, sort of figure out what your first level of reporting is going to be, getting people trained up. You're looking at about three months around that.
Okay. Let's see. Next question is, well, it's two-part actually. Would
Okay.
we own the software, or is it a license?
It's a license generally for these providers. It's a license that you're doing, and a lot of people are moving towards subscription costs. So you might even run into a sort of a per user subscription cost for the individual. And some of those different providers have different models, but we generally own the license, own the software, but that allows us to layer on new items that we're creating, sort of like the attrition prediction service, which I touched on just a little bit, that actually uses at-risk behaviors to predict if people are going to quit. By us owning the license, it allows you to get these new updates periodically. So we do keep the license, and that's generally what I see across the board for providers of labor management software.
Okay. Is this only for Windows?
No, so generally a lot of them, they're going to be accessed through web browsers is generally what the thing is now, is generally how things, and so it depends on the back end. There's some back end conversation. Is it microservice based? Is it, SQL? Is it Oracle? Is it some other type of database? Those types of back ends when you're looking at providers. But from a sort of an overall standpoint, it works across pretty much anything. So if you've got, a Linux back end, we would probably host it, but you still could access it through your, current web browsers that you use internally.
Okay. Let's see. So the next question's, really specific to our LMS, which is, how does Honeywell release updates?
Oh, yeah. So generally what we'll do is we will provide updates into, and they come out, every quarter. If we've got something interesting, every 6 months generally is more the way we're doing it. And what we'll do is we'll install into a test area so that the customers can understand what the impact of the changes that we've made are they going to, change anything that they've added onto it or something like that. We'll run side by side for a little bit and then move the, the new thing over to their production, and then watch it for a little bit, maybe side by side, to make sure that it's correct, and we'll do it. But generally what we'll do is we'll give the customer the ability to take it in, because sometimes there'll be code freezes, sometimes there'll be, again, other stuff that's built onto it, integrations that they don't want to impact. So generally we let the customer choose if they want to take this upgrade that is available, and generally we see them do that once every year, once every 2 years, things like that.
Okay. Let's see. I'm just looking to see if there are any more questions. Okay, there is another question in here that says, can LMS be part of a connected DC, or is it an independent software package?
Oh, good. That's a good question, because it touches on a couple different subjects. Generally, LMS is viewed as a standalone, right? So you've got operations that are running this sort of LMS process, but there are also connections with your WMS. So if you think about the visibility that a WMS provides and the visibility that a labor management system provides, there's these edge cases where they cross over. Like when I talk about capacity from a standpoint. How do I know, if I know from WMS how many replenishment requests I have, I can understand better how I should staff that, because now I have a volume that I could use to push into my labor management system as an estimate to say, hey, I need 5 or 6 people to process this number, this volume of replenishments, or whatever that ends up being. So what we generally try to do is look for those edge cases where data or visibility from both combine to give you a sort of either a better answer or another a deeper answer, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that allows us to solve some problems. So I kind of lost what the initial question was, but really the combination of different visibilities and information sources are where you see value in these, because it is a standalone, but it should not be viewed as standalone because it adds color to information from other systems that allow you to make better decisions.
Okay, well, no, that's great. And I think actually that's a great way to wrap it. Really, this is all the time that we have for questions today. So I want to say thank you to all of our attendees for participating. And if we were unable to answer your question during today's live event, we'll send you a response via email. And thanks, Jason, for a really insightful presentation. We appreciate you being with us.
My pleasure.
Great. And as a reminder, within approximately 48 hours after this live event, you can access this presentation on demand at intelligrated.com/on the move. And you'll also receive an email with a link to a white paper, The Impact of Data Science Upon Labor in the Supply Chain. So on behalf of Honeywell Intelligrated, thank you for attending today's On the Move webinar. We hope you can join us for one or all of our 4 remaining webinars as our Strategies for Driving Productivity in Challenging Times webinar series continues through October. Registration information can be found on our website at intelligrated.com/on the move. So thanks and have a great afternoon.